The Bible mentions the word joy 242 times, and the word rejoice, which is a form of that word, of course, another 191 times. So we have hundreds and hundreds of moments of encouragement sprinkled throughout the entire Bible, the entire story of God, to have joy. And yet, even in a place like this, a place that we call church. A church is really people, it's not a building, and I think we know that, but we call this coming to church. And even in a place like this, when we come to church, there is a part of us that feels like we still need permission to smile, permission to have a little bit of joy. And some of you coming in probably already had some thoughts as you saw other people and thought, why is she so happy? Like, what's his deal? Like, just settle down. Like, it's still early in the morning. It's gloomy. It's rainy. Like, just calm it a little bit. I didn't come here to be greeted like I'm at Disney World. Like, I just needed some moments. I needed a time here. And I get that. I understand that. And sometimes we don't have any bit of silence. We don't have any bit of quiet. We don't have any bit of alone time throughout the week. And maybe there are a few of you that bank on that happening here. And I get it. But God gives us permission 400 times to have some joy. And I understand that joy and smiling are different, and joy and happiness are even different. But it's okay to have joy, and it's okay to smile, and it's okay to laugh because you're just happy. It's okay to experience what's going on around you and have joy. Now, maybe we need permission, so I'm going to give you a chance to think about what really makes you happy, what gives you some joy, and we're going to do a little this or that here. No one's coming up here. It's not going to be weird or awkward, but we'll give you a chance to speak up. So I'm going to give you a this or that, and then as soon as I give you the that, you vote out loud. Just share whatever your answer is. So, chips or cookies? When you have crowd participation, there's always a chance your games go off the rails. So let's, concert or ball game? Beach or mountains? Ocean or river? Wow. Did anyone say river? Okay, you're not as prideful as the ocean crew, I guess. Spring or fall? Changing on the fly. That's not just one answer. Country or hip hop? We are in Tennessee, so cats or dogs? And even more importantly, cats or Vols? Okay, all right, there we go. All right. Different things for different people and different settings produce joy. And we're all very different, and there are things that make us happy that just aren't for everyone else. But there also are moments and seasons in our life in which nothing makes us happy. Nothing lasts. And even with little things like that, you just kind of rolled your eyes and mumbled something like, I don't play games. Not doing that. Not here. And that's fine. I probably would have been one of those as well if I was sitting out there and someone was up here. Joy is not the easiest thing to experience. And smiling for no real apparent reason just seems odd. And it doesn't seem like anything that we even want to happen. But joy is a word we all know and yet struggle to define. We don't really know how to explain it. We just know when we have it, we know when we don't. We know when we see it in someone else, and we know definitely when we do not. And joy is often associated with silliness, childishness, being immature. It's rarely associated with strength or power. It's not often seen as very professional. To have joy seems like something you do when you're a kid. And many of you would have to go back to your childhood years to remember a time when you just laughed because of how happy you were. It's just been a long time. Now, you've laughed at other people. You've laughed at moments, but just to truly laugh because there's joy, it's been a long, long, long time. You say, well, what does that have to do with following Jesus? And it's true. I mean, God did not save us just so that we could be happy. And God's ultimate goal in creating us was not that we were happy, it's that we are His. But when we're His and when we're walking with Him, it's okay to have joy, and it ought to, in many ways, be a response and be a product of that. Yet for many of us, it is a struggle. And one thing that I want us to start with here as we open up God's Word today is that joy is not for the weak. We may not always associate it with power, with maturity, with strength, but truly experiencing joy is actually something that is going to take a lot of work. One of my favorite verses that just, in many ways, just gets taken out of context in my own heart and life, and sometimes I even forget why it's there, but in 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse 27, it says, strength and joy are in his place. Strength and joy are in God's place. Strength and joy are linked because joy often takes a fight. And it takes strength, and it takes determination, and it takes willpower, and much more than that to choose it. One of our core values here at the Bridge is fight for joy. And the reason I, years ago, decided to land on fight for joy as opposed to choose joy or be joyful or rejoice is because of how difficult it is. And like you, at times in my own life, I've gone through seasons in which someone saying, just choose joy or be happy was the last thing that I wanted to hear because it was the last thing that I thought was actually possible. And I had to fight for it. I knew I didn't have it. I wasn't quite sure how to get it. I just knew that it would be a struggle. So fight for joy is one of our core values. Well, thankfully, God's Word gives us a little instruction on how to actually find it. So open your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 12. If you have a Bible with you, or if it's on your phone, feel free to use that as well. Hebrews chapter 12. And in Hebrews 12, we have some instruction that it's not purely the entire chapter about joy, but we find in here a recipe, if you will, some instructions, directions on how to actually fight for our joy. Now, Hebrews chapter 11 is a long list of people who were faithful to God, went through difficult things, and arrived on the other side as people of faith. And we get to verse 1 in chapter 3. And the writer says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, which is the people in chapter 11, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So how do we fight for joy? I think within here we find instructions, at least 4 pivotal moments that the author brings out in Jesus' experience in his own life and also in the lives of those who in chapters 11 had succeeded in becoming people of faith, men and women of God. The first is this: rid yourself of all threats to your joy. Specifically and literally, he said, throw off everything that hinders. In your journey, in your relationship with God, throw off everything that holds you down, that is weighing you down, that is coming between you and the person you've been created to be, between you and the path that God has laid out for you. Throw off everything that hinders. Rid yourselves of all threats to your joy, whether they be mental, whether they are physical, whether they are spiritual, whatever it is. He said, throw it off. He doesn't necessarily yet talk about things that are unholy and things that are sinful. He says, just throw off everything that hinders you. Just because something is moral doesn't mean it is helpful. And the sooner we get to the point of realizing that God's plan for us is not just to stay away from doing bad, but that it is to walk with him in his holiness, that is the changer. Because for most of our lives, especially when we're young and new, maybe even to following Jesus, the goal is just, I got to not do bad things. That is not the issue with God. Yes, that is a result, but it's a result of us being away from him, apart from him. The result is we end up living for ourselves. But the goal is not just to not do bad things. So just because something is moral doesn't mean it's on the table and helpful and productive for you. When I was a kid, we would go to the mall. The malls, I don't know if they're that big a deal at all anymore. I never go, but maybe you do. But when I was a kid, it was the thing. Your family dropped you off at the mall. You went to the movies, or in my case, you'd go to the music store and go through all the albums and all the cassettes and then look at these little discs called CDs going, what is that? What are these new weird things? So you'd go to the music store and be dropped off. And then when my mom would come and pick me back up, we'd meet up again in JCPenney's or wherever to leave. I'd always have my little bag. And she'd say, so what did you buy? And the first words out of my mouth always were, there's no cussing. Like, there's no cussing. Like, that was my thing. So I get my music, and as long as it didn't have the parental advisory thing on there, it was fine in my childish eyes. Now, I now realize there's a lot more to what is right and what is wrong and what is helpful and what is not than maybe cussing in lyrics. But from my perspective, like, that was the benchmark. That was the measuring stick. And often at times in our own relationships with God, we treat it in the same way. Well, God, this is not one of the commandments. I'm not breaking a commandment. It's not a sin to do this. No one's being hurt. It's not against the law. But just because it's moral doesn't mean it's helpful. And he says, throw off everything that hinders. What does that have to do with joy? When you and I allow those things that are not helpful to continue to pile up on us, it is impossible for us to run the race that God has put before us with joy. It becomes more work than we even imagine. It keeps us from being able to keep our minds on what the goal really is. It's just about getting beyond today, which is not joy. It's just moving forward. So whatever it is for you that is holding you back, whether it's negativity or people who are just full of drama in your lives, like, you've got to know, you've got to be strong enough to step out of that and say, I cannot handle this right now. I can't be around this. Apps that you need to delete off your phone, not because they're immoral or wrong. Again, it's not always about what is right and wrong. Sometimes it's about what is holding me back. I often have to go through my phone and go, every time I open this app, I get mad. Therefore, I am deleting it. My news apps, Facebook, all off my phone. I don't have any of it anymore. You say, well, come on, you're not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of an app. What I'm afraid of is where my mind goes when I am continually frustrated or rolling my eyes or going, you got to be kidding me. If I say you got to be kidding me 3 times in a minute, like, I got to get off this thing, whatever it is. And I don't need that. You say, well, yeah, you'll be ignorant to what's going on. Ignorance has served me well for much of my life. Before my iPhone was in my hands, I was fine. I knew very little about what everybody else was eating for lunch, what everybody else was mad about. I knew very little about politics. I knew very little. I voted, or I'd step back, or before I was old enough to do that, I would just go, who's our new one? I don't know. I was fine and probably happier and probably a lot more filled with joy, and there were less things holding me back. I said, well, that's just not the world we live in. Listen, this isn't the world that I'm eventually going to live in. It's not my home. I'm just a traveler. I'm just a stranger passing through. My home is there. And so if there are things down here that are holding me back from my joy, I'm going to let that go. And whether that's getting lost in a comment section or that's just hanging around people who are trashing somebody else, if I don't have the strength to step up and speak up, then I need to step out and just be done. Because God has created me for more. And if I'm too weighed down with all the negative stuff to see that and to be able to act on that, then I'm not going to be able to move forward. Again, it's not about destruction, it's about distraction. And those weights are distractions so often in our own lives. So rid yourself of all threats to your joy. His specific word was throw off everything that hinders. But he didn't stop there. He did go on and say, and the sin that so easily entangles. And so the second word of encouragement is to reject all forms of imitation joy. Because so often that's what sin is. It's not this gross thing that offends everyone who can really see it for what it is. It's definitely offensive to God. And as we grow and become more like him, it becomes more offensive to us. But oftentimes it's just a good thing that the evil one has turned around into something else. And it's become an imitation, a perversion of what it was supposed to be. And it's imitation joy because we grab it and it's great, it's amazing, and then it's over. And we're immediately looking for something else. And if something is incredibly easy to start, but very hard to stop, you can go ahead and bet your last dollar that that is probably going to be something that tangles you up and holds you back and pulls you into a place that you don't want to be. The easier something is to start and the harder it is to stop, that is the recipe for things you want to stay away from. So I thought, are we going back to what is evil and what is... This is about sin that so easily entangles. It's easy to get wrapped up in, regardless of who you are. And the recipients of the letter that we call Hebrews, these were Jewish Christians who were living in terrible times of persecution. They didn't have the freedom that you and I are enjoying today. These are not people who didn't know Jesus. These are people who are following Jesus. He says, stay away from the sin that still, even as a follower of Jesus, so easily entangles you and wraps you up. You've got to be able to see it for what it is, for the destruction that it is. If it's a quick fix, recognize it for what it is. It's most likely, most assuredly not God's plan for his people. And that's how people of God get wrapped up in stuff they never thought they'd get wrapped up in. It was just a quick deal. It was just a quick decision. It was just an accident. And all of a sudden, they find themselves wrapped up and pulled under. Guilt and shame begin to pile up. Places like this, where you come in and sing about the goodness of God, not very appealing anymore because you've got so much guilt, so much shame, so much frustration holding you back, so many regrets. And as those begin to pile up, even if you continue to come and sit in places like this, even if you continue to pray before your meal and pray before you go to bed, there's still that thing between you and God. It just takes your joy. So reject all forms of imitation joy, the sin that so easily entangles. Third, simply recharge with truth, with exposure to what is real, with exposure to what is true. Specifically, he said, run with perseverance, fixing our eyes on Jesus. And then he went on to say, consider him who endured so much. 3 different times there, you're going to have perseverance. You do that by fixing your eyes on the one who persevered and endured. Consider him who persevered and endured. In other words, this is going to be a challenge. This is going to be difficult. You are going to have to, at times, separate yourself and be reminded of what is real. You're going to have face-to-face moments with truth. Not, I'm going to go 51 weeks as hard as I can, do everything I can, then take 1 week at Destin and I'm good. Like that's not a rhythm of God's people. He said regularly you need to put into your lives moments in which you step back and you get quiet and you get still and you allow yourself a moment to look and evaluate your life and say, is my life aligned with God's plans right now or is it not? Because if it's not aligned, it is going to be very difficult to walk in joy if you're constantly having to go back and go, I'm sorry, God. Okay, I'll do this. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. Just stay regularly with him, figuring it out as you go step by step. Even Jesus did this. In Luke chapter 5, verse 16, we're reminded that Jesus, who we're considering, who we're fixing our eyes on in Hebrews 12, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and he prayed. He often stepped back and had a moment to pause and say, Father, while I'm here on earth, I'm submitting myself to your will, and I want to align my will with yours. I only want to do what it is that you have for me to do. I need to know your will and your plan for my life. And if Jesus was choosing to get up in the morning and do this, having moments where he would step away from the crowds just to align himself and make sure that he was in line with the Father's plan, then how much more do you and I need that? This weekend, our teenagers, our middle school and high school guys, had a camp out that turned into a camp in here, and they were working through solitude and what it is to be alone with God, because it's a challenge, especially for men, especially for guys. Like, there could be very few things more painful than just saying, go spend 15 minutes alone with God. Like, what do you do? What do you fix? What do you work on? Like, what do you do with your hands? Like, we don't do well with this stuff. And I think that's why at times it leads to us looking at things like joy and love and peace and patience and thinking, that's for the girls. That's how girls live their lives. That's how it's hard for us. Yet Jesus stepped aside and had those moments of silence and had those moments of surrender, of saying, God, I want to know what your plan is. I want to align myself with you. One of my favorite moments in Scripture is also in the book of Hebrews. It's in chapter 5, and I read it, I think, for the first time during my college years, and it just stuck with me and stayed with me, and I was back there again this week looking at the book of Hebrews, and I was reminded, and I wanted to share that this morning. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7. It says, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. As Jesus walked this earth and went through all the things, the threats to joy and all the struggles, all the temptations that you and I experience, he would have those moments with God, and he would be alone, and he would pray, and he would lift his eyes up to heaven and say, God, I want to align my place with yours, my will with yours, and my plans with yours. And it says he was heard because of his reverent submission. And if you and I are going to have the perseverance and endurance to do all that God has laid before us and be able to run this race and have joy as we do it, we're going to have to recharge with truth. We have to have these moments built into our lives. Not just when we can't run anymore and we fall apart and we break down emotionally, mentally, and physically and say, God, help me. Regularly saying, this is where I need to be. God, align me. And then the fourth thing is simply to run your race. Not another's race, but run your race. The author in Hebrews 12 said, and let us run the race marked out for us. Most of us are incredibly tempted to try to run the race that's marked out for someone else. Because we all look at our own races and think, theirs looks a lot better than mine. Theirs looks easier than mine. Theirs looks more fulfilling than mine. Theirs seems to have more encouragement than mine. Theirs has more friends than mine. Theirs has more health than mine. And we're doing whatever we can to run someone else's race. And in the end, we're making ourselves miserable because we were not created for that race. And the people around us are miserable because we're not meeting the needs and filling the spot that God has for us there in their lives. It's easy for me to look around and say other husbands or other fathers have a race that I enjoy more, or I wish I was mine. But in the end, I'm going to be miserable because I wasn't created to run their races. In my home, my wife and kids are going to be miserable because I'm not being the man I was created to be, because I'm too busy worrying about being someone else and running someone else's race. I have to do what I've been called to do and what I've been created to do. I was speaking with someone last week, and we were just talking about life and things that we go through, and I've come to the point of realizing that the calling on my life to preach the gospel is the heaviest joy that I've ever experienced, ever will. I have tried at times to get away from it and do something else and run your races, and it just hasn't worked out. And as challenging and at times as, from my own perspective, difficult as it is for me to run my race, there's no greater joy than to be a part of what God has made for me and what God has laid out for me. Now, I know not a single one of you ever has wanted to run my race. Preachers' races are not very popular, but you probably can look around and see other races of other people in your lives and think, man, God, why don't I have that? Why can't I do that? Why can't I be a part of that? And God has given you your race. And the quicker you're able to sit back and say, Lord, help me to be content with where you've placed me and what I'm doing, the quicker you're going to be able to experience the joy you've been created to experience. So run your race. Well, inevitably, we still struggle and we still get worn down. And that's why some of you have not laughed in a long time. You've faked the laugh, and you've laughed at maybe something silly that's gone on TV or a moment in a movie, or you've laughed at someone else. But to truly just sit back and smile because you're full of joy, it's been a long, long time. And throughout the years and throughout the seasons of life, it just has worn you down. There have been too many prayers that weren't answered the way you asked for them to be answered, and too many disappointments and too many struggles. And now it's just joy just seems to be the last thing that you're ever going to experience. But it's not just for those of us who have walked with Jesus for a long time. When I was a kid, grumpy people were the older people. And that was just kind of the perspective I had. You get old, you get grumpy. I think the phrases are you lose your filter, you lose your whatever. They're just negative all the time. And now in this generation, there are negative and discouraged and depressed middle schoolers all around us. Shouldn't be that way. My biggest challenge as a middle schooler was if my chain pops off my bike while I'm on the other subdivision, how in the world did my dad put that chain back on? Because I'm not walking this bike back. Now, I didn't live in 1742, but it feels a long, 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 long time ago. And I had a chance over the last couple of years to work with some high schoolers in different schools. And just this last year, I had a 15 or 15 and a half year old kid who I hadn't seen in a couple of weeks tell me he had to take some time away from school. He needed a mental health break. I was like, man, you shouldn't need a mental health break right now. But regardless, he's so inundated with news and negativity and stuff and fear and adults that have no joy that it just filters down. And now we have a joyless generation that is coming up. And it shouldn't be. We're going to have to fight for it. And we're going to have to fight to get it back. Parents, you're going to have to fight for it. Don't have bitter beer face all day long and then wonder why your kids aren't happier. There's a moment in which they look at us and go, all right, should I be happy? Should there be joy? Or why don't you have any of it? And if the church can't be full of joy, then how can we expect those on the outside to be interested in what it is that we have to share? We say, come on with me next Sunday. Sit with me at church. Oh, really? Yeah, come and be miserable with all my other friends. It is a great thing. And one day Jesus is coming back, but for now we're miserable as all get out, but just join us. No one wants that. You can be miserable at home. We've been created for more. Now, God didn't make us to be happy. I want to, again, just make that clear as I close. God made us to be His. But when we're His and when we're walking with Him and we don't have all the stuff, all the drama, all the negativity, all the things that hinder us and the sin that so easily entangles us, when that's not between us and Him, there is happiness and there is joy. I'm going to share with you a closing psalm that was written by a man who had lost his joy because of decisions he had made. Adultery, even murder, terrible father, a lot of ladies in his life. There was a lot of regrets, and he wasn't very old at this time. But in Psalm 51, he cried out to God, said, wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all of my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation.